Picture this. It's November 29th, 2011. You're standing in a Walgreens pharmacy in Cleveland, Ohio. You hand over your prescription for Lipitor, the cholesterol drug you've been taking for years. The pharmacist rings it up. $152 for a 30-day supply. You wince, pay, and leave. The next day, November 30th, you come back with the same prescription. Same pharmacist, same drug, same dose. The price? $15. What just happened? Did the pill change? No. Did the factory change? No. Did the chemical formula change? No. The molecule atorvastatin, that's the actual drug inside Lipitor, is identical. Atom for atom. Same stuff. So what changed? A patent expired. And when I say the price dropped, I don't mean it got a little cheaper. I mean it fell off a cliff. Within 6 months, that $150 bottle would cost $10. Within a year, sometimes $4. An overnight collapse of 95%. This happens constantly in the pharmaceutical world. Every single year, billions of dollars just evaporate. And most people have no idea why, how, or what it means. Tonight, we're going deep into one of the strangest mechanisms in modern capitalism, the patent cliff. We're going to understand why the same pill can cost 15 times more on a Tuesday than it does on a Wednesday. We're going to follow the money, the lawyers, the scientists, and the absolutely brutal economics that make drug companies terrified of a single date on a calendar. This is how. Get comfortable. We've got a story to tell. Let's start with the fundamental deal at the heart of all of this, the patent system. Here's how it works. If you invent something genuinely new, a drug, a machine, a process, the government offers you a deal. You tell the world exactly how your invention works. You publish the details. You share the blueprint. And in exchange, you get a monopoly. For 20 years, you're the only one allowed to make and sell that invention. The logic is elegant. Without this deal, companies would keep inventions secret. Nobody would know how anything worked. Innovation would slow down because everyone would be reinventing the wheel in private. But with patents, everything's in the open. Yes, you get 20 years of monopoly profits. But after that, anyone can make your thing. The knowledge belongs to everyone. For most inventions, this works fine. Patents expire, competitors enter the market, prices drop a bit, life goes on. For prescription drugs, this system creates something closer to economic violence. Here's what makes pharmaceuticals unique. The gap between what it costs to develop a drug and what it costs to manufacture that same drug is almost incomprehensibly large. Let's use real numbers. Developing a new drug, from initial research to FDA approval, costs somewhere between $1 billion and $2.6 billion. And that's the average. Some drugs cost way more. The Alzheimer's drug aducanumab, estimates put it at over $5 billion in development costs. And time? Figure 10 to 15 years from lab concept to pharmacy shelf. Sometimes longer. Now, once that drug is approved, what does it cost to actually manufacture? For Lipitor, our cholesterol drug, industry estimates suggest the actual cost to produce each pill is somewhere around 5 to 10 cents. Maybe less at scale. You see the problem. You spend $2 billion in 12 years to create something that costs a dime to make. The only way you recoup that investment is by charging massively more than manufacturing cost during your patent monopoly. And this is why drug patents are different from, say, a patent on a new type of hinge or a better mousetrap. The stakes are existential. That 20-year clock isn't just ticking down to more competition. It's ticking down to complete annihilation of your revenue. But here's the first complication. That 20-year patent clock starts ticking the moment you file the patent, not when the drug gets approved, when you file. Think about what this means. You discover a promising molecule in 2005. You file a patent immediately. You have to, or someone else might. That starts your 20-year clock. Now you've got to run clinical trials. Phase 1, test on healthy humans for safety. Phase 2, test on sick people to see if it works. Phase 3, large-scale trials with thousands of patients. This takes years, often a decade. So by the time the FDA approves your drug in 2015, you've already burned through 10 years of your 20-year monopoly. You don't have 20 years to make money. You have 10, maybe 12 if you're lucky. The Hatch-Waxman Act of 1984 tried to address this. It allowed drug companies to apply for patent extensions to make up for time lost in FDA approval processes. You can get up to 5 extra years added. But even with that, you're looking at maybe 12 to 15 years of actual market exclusivity. And for a product that cost $2 billion to create. This creates an absolutely brutal economic pressure. You have to charge extraordinary. Let's stay with Lipitor because it's one of the best documented cases. Pfizer didn't invent atorvastatin. They bought the company that did, Warner Lambert, in 2000 for $90 billion. That's not a typo. $90 billion. Largely because of Lipitor. At its peak, Lipitor was generating $13 billion per year in revenue for Pfizer. Not profit, revenue. But the margins on a drug like this are extraordinary. We're talking 80 to 90% gross margins once you account for the fact that each pill costs pennies to make. Pfizer knew exactly when the patent would expire. November 30th, 2011. They had known this date for years, and they knew what would happen. So what do you do when you're staring at a cliff? You prepare. You diversify. You try to develop new drugs. You acquire other companies. You do everything possible to make sure that when Lipitor's revenue vanishes, you have something else to replace it. But there's another strategy too, a darker one. You try to push that cliff date back any way you can. The pharmaceutical industry has developed an entire arsenal of tactics to extend patent protection beyond that initial 20-year window. Collectively, this is called evergreening. The goal is simple. Find a way to keep generic competitors out of the market for as long as possible. Here's the most basic version, the reformulation. Let's say you have a drug that's taken twice a day. Your patent is about to expire. So you develop an extended release version that only needs to be taken once a day. You patent that new formulation. Technically, it's a new invention, a different delivery mechanism, different pharmacokinetics. Now you market the hell out of the once-daily version. You tell doctors it's more convenient for patients. You offer coupons and rebates. You shift everyone you can from the old twice-daily version to the new once-daily version. When your original patent expires, yes, generics can make the twice-daily version, but most patients are now on the once-daily version, which you still have patent protection for. AstraZeneca did this with Prilosec and Nexium. Prilosec's patent was expiring. Nexium is essentially a slightly modified version of Prilosec. They isolated one isomer of the molecule. Chemically, it's different enough to patent. Clinically, the benefits over Prilosec are debatable, but it worked. They moved patients to Nexium, kept their market share, extended a more aggressive tactic, patent everything. File patents not just on the drug itself, but on every possible variation, formulation, dosage, delivery method, and use case you can think of. One drug might have dozens or even hundreds of patents attached to it. Not all of them will be strong. Many might be legally questionable. But that's not really the point. The point is to create a patent thicket, a dense jungle of overlapping intellectual property, claims that a generic manufacturer has to hack through. Even if most of those patents are weak, challenging them in court is expensive and time-consuming. A generic company has to decide, do we spend millions in legal fees fighting 47 different patents, many of which might be invalid but might not be? Or do we just wait a few more years until the whole thicket clears? Often they wait. AbbVie's Humira is the poster child for this strategy. Humira is one of the best-selling drugs in history. At its peak, over $20 billion in annual sales, and AbbVie built a patent fortress around it, over 130 patents in the U.S. alone, some on the drug itself, some on how it's manufactured, some on the pen device used to inject it, some on specific dosing regimens. The main patent expired in 2016, but because of the thicket, generic biosimilar versions didn't reach the U.S. market until 2023. 7 years later, 7 years of extended monopoly pricing. On a drug making $20 billion a year, do the math. That's $140 billion in revenue that wouldn't have existed if the main patent expiration actually meant market entry for competitors. Now we get into the really controversial stuff. Here's the scenario. Your patent is about to expire. A generic company has filed with the FDA to make a generic version. They're claiming your patent is invalid, or that their generic doesn't infringe your patent, or both. You could fight them in court. Maybe you win, maybe you lose. Court cases are expensive and uncertain. Or you could pay them not to launch their generic. This is called a pay-for-delay deal, or more euphemistically, a reverse payment settlement. Here's how it works. The brand name company and the generic company settle their patent dispute. As part of the settlement, the brand name company pays the generic company a large sum of money. In exchange, the generic company agrees not to launch their product until a certain date, usually several years in the future. Everybody wins, except consumers. The brand name company gets a few more years of monopoly pricing. The generic company gets paid handsomely without even having to manufacture or sell anything. And prices stay high. The Federal Trade Commission has been going after these deals for years, calling them anti-competitive. And they are. In 2013, the Supreme Court ruled in FTC versus Actavis that these deals could violate antitrust law. But they still happen. They're just structured more carefully now. One variation. Instead of direct cash, the brand name company licenses other products to the generic company, or agrees to delay launching their own authorized generic, or provides other value that's harder to trace as a direct payment for delay. The FTC estimated that pay-for-delay deals cost consumers $3.5 billion per year. In highs, here's a mind-bending one. Sometimes the brand name company launches their own generic. Wait, what? Here's the context. Under the Hatch-Waxman Act, the first generic company to successfully challenge a patent gets 180 days of exclusivity. For those 6 months, they're the only generic on the market competing with the brand name. This is supposed to be a reward for taking the risk of challenging the patent. But here's the problem. If there's only one generic and one brand name, prices don't actually drop that much. The generic company can price their version at, say, 80% of the brand name price and still make huge profits. So brand name companies started launching authorized generics, identical products, manufactured in the same facilities, but sold under a generic label at generic prices. Why would they do this? Because it destroys the profit margin for the independent generic company. If the brand name is selling an authorized generic at 20% of their original price, the independent generic can't charge 80% anymore. They have to compete. This reduces the incentive for generic companies to challenge patents in the first place. If they know their 180-day exclusivity period will be undermined by an authorized generic, the reward isn't worth the risk. Clever, ruthless, legal, and happening constantly. There's another whole dimension to this, gaming the FDA approval process itself. Generic drugs don't go through the same clinical trials as brand-name drugs. That would be absurd. We already know the drug is safe and effective. Instead, generics just have to prove bioequivalence, that their version is absorbed by the body in the same way as the original. This is much faster and cheaper. A bioequivalence study might cost $1 to $5 million and take 2 years. Compare that to the $1 to $2 billion and 10 to 12 years for the original drug. But brand name companies can slow this process down. One tactic: refuse to provide samples of your drug to generic manufacturers for testing. You'd think this would be illegal, but it's not always clear-cut. The generic company needs samples to conduct their bioequivalent study. If the brand name company won't sell to them, and why would they? The generic company has to either find another source or petition the FDA for help. This can add years of delay. Another tactic: file citizen petitions with the FDA raising safety concerns about the generic version right before it's about to be approved. These petitions require the FDA to respond, which slows down the approval process. Are these concerns legitimate? Sometimes. Often. They're strategic delays dressed up as patient safety advocacy. The FDA has gotten wise to this and now expedites responses to citizen petitions. One more wrinkle: everything I've described so far applies to traditional small molecule drugs, but increasingly, the most expensive drugs are biologics. Drugs made from living cells rather than chemical synthesis. Drugs like Humira, Enbrel, Remicade. These are proteins, antibodies, complex molecules manufactured in living cell cultures. Biologics are different. You can't just copy the chemical formula. The manufacturing process itself affects the final product. Small variations in temperature, nutrients, cell line can produce slightly different molecules. So instead of generics, biologics have biosimilars, products that are similar but not identical to the original. The approval pathway for biosimilars is more complex than for traditional generics. More testing required, more regulatory uncertainty, higher costs, maybe $100 to $250 million instead of $1 to $5 million. And guess what? Many of the most profitable drugs are biologics, and their makers have used every trick in the book to delay biosimilar competition. All right, so after all the games, all the delays, all the legal maneuvering, eventually the patent expires, or the last viable patent expires, or a court invalidates the key patents, or the pay-for-delay deal reaches its end date. And then generics launch. What happens next is genuinely dramatic. Let's go back to Lipitor, November 30th, 2011. On day one of generic availability, Ranbaxy, the first generic manufacturer, launched their version. They had 180 days of exclusivity. Within weeks, Pfizer's Lipitor sales dropped by 50%. Within 6 months, 80%. Within a year, generic atorvastatin had captured over 90% of the market. Pfizer went from $13 billion in annual Lipitor revenue to under $2 billion in about 12 months. That's an $11 billion cliff. And the price? Generic atorvastatin was selling for $10 to $15 for a 30-day supply compared to $150 for brand-name Lipitor. But here's what's interesting. It didn't bottom out immediately. During Ranbaxy's 180-day exclusivity, prices dropped, but not to rock bottom. Ranbaxy was charging maybe $70 to $80 for their generic, while Pfizer kept Lipitor at $150. Then, after 180 days, other generic manufacturers entered. Watson, Teva, Mylan, others. Now there were 5, 6, 7 different generic versions competing. That's when the price truly collapsed, down to $20, then $15, then $10, then $4 for the cheapest generic at discount pharmacies. This pattern repeats over and over. The first generic typically prices at 70 to 80%. The obvious winners, consumers and insurance companies. If you were paying $150 per month for Lipitor, and now you're paying $10, that's $1,680 per year saved. Multiply that by millions of patients. The FDA estimates that generics save the U.S. healthcare system $338 billion per year. That's not total generic spending. That's the savings compared to if everyone was still taking brand-name versions. Generic manufacturers also win, but it's a different kind of victory. Their margins are way lower. They're not making 80 to 90% gross margins like the brand-name companies. They're competing on price in a commodity market. But the volumes are huge. And if you're the first to file, getting that 180-day exclusivity, you can make hundreds of millions during that window. Ranbaxy made an estimated $600 million in profit during their 180-day Lipitor exclusivity period. Not bad for a drug that costs pennies to manufacture. The brand name company, obviously. Revenue craters. Stock price often takes a hit if they don't have a strong pipeline of new drugs to replace the lost revenue. But there's a less obvious loser. Research and development. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Those monopoly profits fund R&D for new drugs. When Pfizer was making $13 billion a year on Lipitor, they were plowing billions into researching new drugs. Some of those research projects failed. Many failed, but some succeeded, leading to new treatments. When Lipitor revenue collapsed, Pfizer laid off researchers. They closed research facilities. R&D budgets got cut. This is the bargain at the heart of the patent system. We allow high prices during the monopoly period specifically to incentivize companies to invest in developing new drugs. And it works. The U.S. pharmaceutical industry develops more new drugs than any other country, largely because U.S. prices are higher and patent protections are stronger, but it also creates this brutal boom and bust cycle. Massive profits for 10 to 12 years, then collapse. This is why you'll hear pharmaceutical executives talk obsessively about the pipeline. The pipeline is the portfolio of drugs in development. If you've got 5 drugs coming to market in the next 3 to 5 years, and one of your current blockbusters is losing patent protection, you're okay. The new drugs replace the revenue from the old drugs. But if your pipeline is weak, if you don't have new drugs ready, patent expirations are existential threats. This is what happened to Pfizer. Lipitor was such a monster, $13 billion per year, that even with other drugs in their portfolio, losing Lipitor was devastating. Pfizer's stock dropped. They went through rounds of layoffs. They started looking for acquisitions to rebuild their pipeline. Smaller pharmaceutical companies have it even worse. If you're a company that only has one or two major drugs and one loses patent protection, you might not survive. Between 2010 and 2015, the industry called it the patent cliff era. Multiple blockbuster drugs lost patent protection in a short window. Lipitor, Plavix, Singulair, Seroquel, others. Over $60 billion in annual sales went generic in just a few years. Some companies didn't make it. Others merged. The industry consolidated. This is ongoing. Right now, as I'm recording this, several major drugs are approaching patent expiration. Humira, as I mentioned, just lost exclusivity in the U.S. in 2023. That's a $20 billion drug going generic. AbbVie's stock has been volatile. They've been desperately trying to replace that revenue. Eliquis, a blood thinner, making about $10 billion per year for Bristol-Myers Squibb and Pfizer, is losing patent protection in 2026. Keytruda, Merck's cancer immunotherapy, making over $20 billion per year, has patents expiring between 2028 to 2030. Each of these represents another cliff. Billions in revenue evaporating, and each time the same pattern will play out. First, generic launches, price drops 20 to 30%. More generics enter, price drops 80 to 90%. Patients save money. Insurance companies save money. Brand name manufacturer loses billions. Let's bring this back to where we started, a person standing in a pharmacy. For that person, the patent cliff is a sudden, dramatic relief. A drug that was costing them thousands per year suddenly costs tens of dollars. That's life-changing, literally. People ration medications because they can't afford them. They cut pills in half. They skip doses. They choose between their prescriptions and their rent. When a drug goes generic, that pressure vanishes. But here's the tragic part. Many people don't know generics are available, or their doctor keeps prescribing the brand name out of habit, or their insurance has weird formulary rules that make the generic cost more than the brand name in their specific plan. So even when generics exist, not everyone benefits immediately. There are people right now paying $150 for brand name Lipitor when generic atorvastatin costs $4 at Costco, just because they don't know to ask for the generic. That information gap represents real suffering and wasted money. At the end of the day, the patent cliff reveals something fundamental about how we've chosen to incentivize medical innovation. We've decided that the way to get new drugs is to allow companies to charge very high prices for a limited time, and then force prices down dramatically when patents expire. It's boom and bust, feast and famine, huge profits followed by collapse. And it works, sort of. We get new drugs, we get competition eventually, prices do fall, but it's also chaotic, inefficient, and creates perverse incentives for companies to game the system. Is there a better way? Maybe. Some people advocate for publicly funded drug development. The government funds the research, owns the patents, licenses production to multiple manufacturers from day one. No monopoly, no cliff, just reasonable prices from the start. Others argue for patent reforms, shorter monopoly periods, restrictions on evergreening tactics, mandatory licensing. Others say the system is fine. We just need better enforcement of existing laws. Go after pay-for-delay deals harder, crack down on patent thickets. I'm not here to advocate for any particular solution. But I do think it's important to understand how the current system actually works. Because if you don't understand the mechanics, the incentives, the tactics, the economics, you can't have an informed opinion about whether it should change. So that's the patent cliff. It's why your prescription suddenly costs $10 instead of $150. It's why pharmaceutical companies are terrified of specific dates on the calendar. It's why billions of dollars in revenue can disappear overnight. It's a system built on a bargain, monopoly profits now, competition later. And it's a system that creates enormous incentives for companies to delay later as long as possible. The next time you pick up a generic prescription and marvel at how cheap it is, remember, there's a reason it used to cost 15 times more. And that reason is a patent that just fell off a cliff. This has been Night School. Thanks for learning with me tonight. If you want to go deeper on any of this, the specific tactics companies use, the economics of drug development, the future of pharmaceutical innovation, let me know in the comments. We've got more stories to tell. Sleep well